This is the Potomac Local News Podcast, where we bring you the latest on what's happening in your community from Fredericksburg, Manassas, and Woodbridge. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe to get more Potomac Local News, and check us daily at potomaclocal.com for breaking news, community updates, and fun events around town. Now, here's your host, Potomac Local News founder and publisher, Uriah Kiser.
Hello and welcome to this edition of the Potomac Local News Podcast. I'm your host, Uriah Kiser, founder and publisher of PotomacLocalNews.com. Joining us on the podcast today is Paige Gibbons-Backus, and she is with the Prince William County Department of Historic Preservation, and we're going to talk about the Williams-Dawe House today. And not the Doll House, the Dawe House. It's D-A-W-E. And I remember, first of all, Paige, thanks for coming on the podcast today.
No, it's my pleasure.
I remember when we started talking about the purchase of this property, and it was one that as a Prince William County native, as a guy who grew up in Woodbridge and has covered Prince William County for more years than I'd like to admit, I didn't even know it was there. And when I saw it, it was like, wow, I've been by this place driving down Bristow Road so many times, and I didn't even know, like I said, it was there or what it was all about. So this is a major project you guys have been working on. Set the stage for us. Talk to us about the house and its meaning, the history behind it, and why the county decided to purchase it, what it's doing.
Yes. So the Williams-Dawe House, that's what we're calling it as of right now, is known by many different names, depending on who you talk to here for the history of Brentsville. It's known locally as the White House because of its color. Historically, the house was stuccoed over in white with a red roof. It's known as the Webster House for the family who had owned it in the 20th century. And so it's known by a lot of different names. But it is a really important piece of the history here of Brentsville. And so back a couple of years ago in 2022, when the property came for sale, we were really fortunate that we had the opportunity to be able to purchase it, add it to Brentsville Courthouse Historic Center, and work on its preservation and its restoration, which is a project that we have been constantly undergoing. Even to this point, it's still a work in progress. And so most people recognize the Williams-Dawe House, the White House, as you had just said. They drive down Bristow Road all the time. It's a very prominent structure right off of Bristow Road, opposite the side of the street from the courthouse. And it really has a very important piece of Brentsville history. And so it's one of the earliest residences that still survive here in the town of Brentsville. And the house dates from the 1820s. So the same time that the courthouse and the jail were built, the same time that the county seat was moved from Dumfries here to Brentsville in a more centrally located area here of the county. And it's called the Williams-Dawe House at this point in time after the two families who first moved into the house. And so the house was built by a woman named Jane Williams, whose husband, John Williams, served as the clerk of the court. However, he passed away in the early 1830s. And so not long after, her brother, Philip Devereux Dawe, became the clerk of the court and lived in the house. And so it was lived in by the Williams family and the Dawe family. Jane herself was a Dawe before she married John Williams. It stayed in that family for about 30 years until about the 1850s. And then it went through many different owners, from the Bowder family to the Webster family to the Machen family to now our ownership, where we can work to tell the story of all of these different families who have lived in the house. And it's been a work in progress. So as when we purchased the house in 2022, when people have driven by it, it was overgrown in ivy. There were trees hiding the property, really.
I remember seeing pictures. It was not pretty. And when you guys came to the Board of Supervisors and say, this is what we're going to buy, normally when somebody says, this is what we're going to buy, it's nice and shiny and pretty, but this was anything but. You guys had your work cut out for you when you bought this.
Right. So unfortunately, I mean, what you see this a lot here, really anywhere. If you don't live in a house, if you don't work and constantly maintain a home, it does not take very long for it to start to fall apart. And unfortunately, just due to circumstances, the Williams-Dawe House remained vacant for about 10 years before Prince William County purchased the property. And so over the course of time, the chimney fell and onto the roof. It actually created a hole in the roof that created water damage all the way from the second floor down to the first floor. It was There was no electricity, there was no water inside the house, and so it was open to the elements, and so there was greenery even growing inside.
Wow.
Mosquitoes kind of creeping in.
Any critters that you found in there when you actually went inside?
We did not find any critters itself, but we did
Okay.
find paw prints. We did find a lot of different kind of clues that say, yes, there have been animals inside the house at one point in time.
I want to get to the restoration here in a second, but I want to talk about the importance of the location of this house, and you hit on it. I mean, going back, I mean, this was Victorian times, and then in the 1820s, 1830s, and the county seat has not always been Manassas. You know, it was, as you said, it was here in Brentsville, where in fact, there is an old courthouse across the street from the house that we're talking about, the Williams-Dawe House. And if you've not been there, it's a beautifully restored courthouse center. It's the historic center. There's a very and you'll have to clue me in on the dates of that courthouse and when it was in service. But not only is there a courthouse there's a jail with a ghost story right next to it, and it's a very popular place. If you've not been, you have to go. I know that you guys do a bluegrass festival there at least once a year, and it's a big deal. So that's, if you love bluegrass, that's a great reason to get out there to Brentsville and do that. But this area, Brentsville, was at one time the county seat of Prince William County. It was the place where you came to the courthouse to do your official business. What did the county look like at that time?
Yeah, as you can imagine, Prince William County in the 1800s, particularly in the early 1800s, it was very rural. People were very far spread out. There were a lot of farmers, there were a lot of tradesmen. You had several mills that operated here in Prince William County along the waterways. And so it took people a long way to travel back and forth. And that's actually one of the reasons why Brentsville did become the county seat in 1820. Previous to that, the county seat, or the government center for Prince William County, was located all the way in Dumfries, where it used to be along Quantico Creek, where it was actually a pretty decent seagoing port. But once the port filled in, once people started moving further out west to better land, it became a hassle to travel all the way back to Dumfries to conduct any kind of official business. And so the people of Prince William County actually petitioned in order to have the county seat moved to a more centrally located area. And so in 1820, the town of Brentsville was actually created specifically for this purpose. They took 6 acres to build a tavern, to build a courthouse, to build the jail, to build the clerk's office, so that way they could have a more easily accessible government center for the residents of the county. And then you had several different lots around those 6 acres, approximately 50 lots to be exact, that were then sold for private residences, businesses, to create the town that we knew by the time of the 1850s, 1860s.
And Brentsville is centrally located, if you will. It's very close to Manassas, but in 1820, and we're talking, I mean, obviously, well before something like the Prince William Parkway just kind of opened up the entire county and made it very quickly. I mean, I can remember going back before Prince William Parkway and Davis Ford Road and Route 234, the 2-lane roads being the only way to get to and from Woodbridge and Manassas. But in 1820, to have to go all the way, if you're in Manassas area, Brentsville, Nokesville, so on and so forth, and you have to go to Dumfries. I mean, that could be I imagine that could be an overnight trip.
It very well could be. And I mean, here on Bristow Road, which is where Brentsville Courthouse Historic Center is located off of, that actually was the main thoroughfare. So if you recognize Bristow Road, if you recognize Joplin, that was really the main thoroughfare from the eastern end of the county to the western end of the county before eventually connecting with Linton Hall and Route 15 to go out to the valley. And so people were following Bristow Road to move further and further west. And so that's why we really became this central hub, if you will, for the residents of Prince William County, not only to do official business, but also for people to come and sell their wares at markets. This is where people would come to socialize during court days and to be able to visit with friends, catch up on the latest news and gossip. All sorts of social, political, and economic events that took place here in the town of Brentsville. And that's one of the reasons why you had the town really kind of build up with some of these local residents. And so the Williams-Dawe House is one of the few residents that still survive to this day. Unfortunately, the town of Brentsville sustained extensive damage over the course of the Civil War. And when the county seat moved to Manassas and left Brentsville because of the railroad being in Manassas, the town of Brentsville really kind of stayed in its rural 19th century state. And so, unfortunately, some of the houses that did survive into the beginning of the 20th century, unfortunately, became worn down, became abandoned, and eventually would come and fall down. And so we don't have a lot of historical resources from the 19th century outside of these buildings that still survive today.
Now, let's dive into the story that you plan to tell here at this house, at this center. When it's all set, and we'll talk about what it's going to take to get it all set to come and visit. When it's ready to go, what's going to be the interpretation? What's the focus in the stories that you're going to be telling here?
Right, so that's the information that we are still working on. So the house has over 200 years of history, and it's hidden in many different places, in the books, in the local libraries, in the house itself. It's hidden with the different primary resources and all of the people who had lived in the building and who are associated with the property. And so part of our efforts in the restoration of the Williams-Dawe House is not just to preserve the house itself, which at this point in time, we have stabilized the house to prevent any damage from, for example, the hole in the roof, the chimneys collapsing, things like that. Now we're at a point where we can try to work to learn as much information as we can about the house, so that way it'll influence our thoughts and our decisions, and in working with the Prince William County community as well to try and determine what we want to do with the house before this project is said and done.
When you found the house, you mentioned it was in a state of disrepair. Talk to me about some of the things that you guys are working on to bring it back up, to maybe restore it to I assume you might be restoring it to what it might have looked like back in its early heyday. So talk to me about that work.
Yeah, so our first and foremost project when acquiring the house was stabilization, right? So the house was in really bad shape. We wanted to make sure that it wouldn't get into any of the worst state before we could start the restoration of the house. And so the first thing that we had to do was stabilize the chimneys, because the brickwork on all of those chimneys had become unstable to the point where, the fact, as I had mentioned, one of them had actually collapsed onto the roof and made a rather significant hole. And so we had to stabilize all of the chimneys. We put a new roof on the building in order to try and preserve it. And then we are currently working on what is called a historic structures report. So we are actually working with a local preservation firm to do research about the property and to be able to go throughout the property and see what is 200 years old, what might have been a more modern addition, what in the house is stable, what is unstable, and collect all of this information about what the architecture is like, what the engineering inside the house is like. And so that will give us a roadmap of what we need to prioritize first as we're working on stabilizing the house and getting it accessible to the public.
And I think that's cool. And I think if anyone wants a preview of what that looks like, if you have done that work at Ripon Lodge in Woodbridge, and the last time I was there, Bill Backus, I believe your husband, gave me a tour of that place, and he showed me the addition to the house and what's original. And upstairs, there's this closet door. I think there's a room door, closet door, what have you. And there's some, I forget what he called it, but there's a dating where you can actually peel back the layers of the paint and see what's original to the house. And this property is even the Ripon Lodge is even older than the Williams-Dawe House. I think Ripon goes back to 1740, 1750.
It's 1747.
Yeah. Okay. Good. I was paying attention in school that day, and I remember, and it's just, and you think to yourself, well, Uriah, it's just a closet door. No, go see it. Go to Ripon and see what they've done there. See what the Historic Preservation Office has done to showcase one of the first and oldest homes in Prince William County, and restoring it and bringing it back to life and telling that story. If you can do half of what you've done at Ripon here in Brentsville, that's really something.
Well, and that's actually, it's a really fascinating story with the Williams-Dawe House, because when we had purchased the house in 2022, this was not the first time that the house had been in a state of disrepair like this. And so one of the stories that I find most fascinating about the Williams-Dawe House is actually the story of the Webster family, who purchased the house in the 1940s. Because when Agnes Webster, when she purchased the house in 1941, the house had again been vacant for several years. It was falling apart, and she actually did a ton of restoration work on the house in the 1940s, so 41 to 45, really. So in the midst of Depression and World War II, she was actually able to restore this house and make it a loving home for her family. So as we are going in and doing these historic structures reports, as we're going in and doing these architecture and engineering studies, it's really fascinating for us to find out what is from the house originally in the 1820s and what is from the 1940s restoration of the house.
So what I'd like to, as we wrap up here, what I'd like to know is, how can people follow along, follow your project, your progress on this project here? Maybe how can they volunteer, give of their time, maybe give of their money to help you restore this house and tell its story, and tell the larger story of Brentsville?
Yes. So if you're interested in information about the Williams-Dawe House, we actually do have a website for it on our website. So if you go to the Office of Historic Preservation's website, that is www.pwcva.gov/history. You can actually go to Brentsville's webpage, and we actually have status updates for the Williams-Dawe House. So as we find more information about those who lived in the house and the stories that we can tell and the progress and the restoration that we're making, we're actually updating our timeline and our research on there. And if you're interested in helping with the preservation of the house, there are several different ways that you can get involved. For example, one of the ways that you can get involved is just by coming and seeing the house. So you can come and visit us at Brentsville Courthouse Historic Center. While the Williams-Dawe House is not currently open to the public on a regular basis, we do actually have hard hat tours once a year during Historic Preservation Month to give people an opportunity to kind of see where we're at, get engaged with it, and also give us your ideas on what you would like to see being done with the house. In addition to this, yes, as you had mentioned, donations are always welcome to go to the restoration of the Williams-Dawe House. Our foundation, the Prince William County Historic Preservation Foundation, is actually actively fundraising to help support this project and the restoration of the Williams-Dawe House. So you can look up more information on our foundation and how to donate to that. In addition to this, if you have connections to Brentsville, or if you know anyone who's had connections to Brentsville or the Williams-Dawe House, one of the things that's so fascinating here about Brentsville Courthouse Historic Center is that we still have people who are still around today who were involved here at Brentsville before it became a historic center. For example, we have people who went to the school when it was a schoolhouse. We have people who got married in the church when it was an active congregation. And just last week, we actually had an oral history with two siblings who actually grew up in the White House, in the Williams-Dawe House. And so those connections are still there. And so we are trying to make those connections and gather those histories so that they can be forever preserved.
And I imagine, obviously, if they're still alive, then it would have had to have been, relatively recently. So, I mean, so when you found the house, it was in a state of disrepair. It was in a state, as they say. But it would clearly, it had been lived in the past, sounds like maybe 25, 30, 40, 50 years?
Yeah, so the house has actually been lived in almost continuously from when the house was built until about 15 years ago. Okay. And so some of these people who we're talking to grew up in the house in the 50s and the 60s. We even have done oral histories with those who had sold the house to us, for they had lived in the house as well as early as the early 2000s.
Paige Gibbons-Backus is the historic site manager at the Brentsville Courthouse Historic Center, which is right across the street from the Williams-Dawe House. I think we're trying to hammer that point home. There's so much to do here. If you've not seen it, come out there and take a look at that historic courthouse and everything that it has going on out there. And she is with the Prince William County Office of Historic Preservation. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Potomac Local News Podcast.